I talk a lot about how to become a foster parent and saying yes to kids, but something that's not talked about as much is when a kid is removed from the home, and that's called disruption. Today, I'm going to talk about how to prevent it, what that looks like, how to support a kid through it, and what you as a foster parent should be thinking about and doing after you disrupt. I think generally disruption can cause trauma for the child and even for the caregiver who's going through it. But I think it's important to talk about the nuance because sometimes it is needed for safety reasons. And I'm not here to villainize foster parents. I am here to talk about what we can do during that situation to make it as smooth as possible for the child. So here is what disruption is. Essentially, it's when a foster parent or a child formally requests to be removed from the foster home. It is usually a foster parent who does this, but kids can also talk to their worker and request to be placed elsewhere. In each county and state, there's going to be different policies that direct how this process works. Usually a foster parent has to submit this in writing, and then there is a certain amount of days the county has to place the child into a different home. It's usually between 10 and 30 days. It will be dependent on if this is a treatment foster home. Of course, if there are immediate safety concerns, the process can work a little bit faster. But I will say with everything with child welfare is there's always a policy and a plan, but things can go very differently. I recommend you having backup plans, like if you have a permanent child in your home and there are safety concerns, I would spend some time thinking about what you would do in that situation if you had 10 to 30 days that you needed to work through. For example, I know some foster families may have a local grandparent that their permanent child could go stay with for a weekend if there was an immediate safety concern. So disruption typically happens because there is an immediate safety concern, a growing concern that the foster parent no longer feels that they can manage, or there is some type of constraint. So for example, maybe a foster parent has some upcoming medical needs, and so they do have to disrupt the placement. So for the next 4 or 5 months, they can tend to a medical need. There may be upcoming travel for work or a promotion has occurred and things are just different for a foster parent. And then of course, sometimes kids' needs are beyond what a foster parent can manage. So maybe it's an emotional, behavioral, or medical need that the foster parent is unable or unwilling to support. Like I said earlier, kids can also request to be moved with their worker. If they don't feel supported or well cared for, they can speak with their worker and request a move as well. And sadly, some adopted placements also go through a disruption. So what I mean by that is a child is matched with a foster parent for adoption, and typically there is a 6-month period where that foster family will foster the child. And after that period, everyone will come back together and decide if the adoption will move forward. And sometimes it doesn't move forward. This, I think, is one of the hardest moments because there is so much emotion and planning and future that is wrapped into all of this. And so it doesn't always work out. And sometimes those kids will be moved to another foster home. In pulling all the information for this, I tried to find a data point to how often disruption is happening. And it was actually really hard to find this exact data point. Some studies were saying 10 to 15% of placements end in disruption, while others cited numbers as high as 50%. So I wanted to talk about this topic and how to support kids because it's definitely happening in many foster homes. Because disruptions can be very difficult and traumatic for kids, I want to spend some time and talk about how we can prevent this from happening. You know, when a kid has to move your home, it's another severed attachment to a primary caregiver. It's often a new school. It's a different home, different rules. It is very difficult for a kid to move. It's really important that caregivers and foster parents are taking these things very seriously to prevent this from happening. The first thing I want to talk about is being very careful with when we say yes. And this starts at the very beginning when the call comes in. So when you get a call for a child who needs a home, it's really important to ask all the questions you need to ask and think very thoughtfully about what you can manage in your life. Can you say yes to this child right now? Is work okay? Are your personal relationships in a place that are stable? Are your finances stable? There's more than just the child to think about because you have to think long term. The average amount of time a child stays in foster care is around 15, 16, 17 months. And so that is a long time to think about. And so it's really important that yes is very carefully considered. And then from there, every yes also needs to be considered considered. So saying yes to therapy and support, saying yes to your friends coming to help you. All of these things are really important to consider the entire time to help prevent a disruption from occurring. Along the way, as the case plan is established and services are put in place, it's important to be constantly reflecting as a caregiver on if we have enough support. Do you need to be asking your friends and family to step in to help? Do you need to find a babysitter or respite provider? Should you be asking the county for transportation help? Maybe in this moment today, this month, you have the capacity and time to be transporting 3 times a week to a visit. But is that sustainable? And so it's really important that we lay the groundwork for our future selves so that we can sustain for the child and continue to support them long-term if needed. And I want to touch on respite and babysitting just for a minute because I think that this is really important and can help sustain through really hard seasons. So respite is when a child lives with another foster parent or a certified caregiver for a weekend or a week here and there. And this allows the foster parents, the primary foster parents, for a mental health break. Maybe they tend to some things with work or are traveling, going to see family. But building that time in can be really important for the long run. I remember at the beginning, this was not something that I had planned for. If I'm being honest, it backfired on us. It got to the point that we were giving so much of our time and energy that there was really no additional time in our schedule for each other, me and my husband, for our families, for my personal needs, for my work. We approach fostering very differently now. We try to have, monthly date nights, if not weekly, and we try to have weekends away with and without the kids so that we can have, that moment to kind of reset and reconnect. It's very important to us, and I think it's important to so many caregivers. And I will add just a small note about babysitters because I get this question a lot. Oftentimes, foster parents can get babysitters of their choice. It's called prudent parenting standards. And this allows foster parents to go out and find an appropriate babysitter for their foster children. I will add though, in some agencies, this is not allowed depending on the level of needs for the child. We ran into a lot of issues finding babysitters for our kids. We ended up using other foster parents as babysitters, which was really great. And another thing that we do sometimes is just have the babysitter come after bedtime. Bedtime is often a very hard time in our house. And so we were able to have later date nights. So maybe we'd see a movie or get dinner late. And that made it easier for babysitters as well. Because what ended up happening is we were having babysitters quit on us because the needs were too great of the children. And lastly, it's really important as a caregiver to find supportive services. So this could be support group with other foster parents or grief groups. This could be your own therapist. This could be a parent mentor. These are things that I definitely do in my life, and I think it's really helped contribute to the sustainability of being a foster parent. So now I want to talk through some things to consider if you have decided that you need to disrupt the placement, because there's so much that foster parents can do to center the child and support them through this. First, I would consider telling your case management team, maybe copying the supervisor in writing, that you need the child to be removed from your home. This formally gets the wheels in motion, the policies are put in place, and the workers can start finding a more appropriate home. There is usually a time limit for how long the department has to find a new home, but I would say for caregivers, if you can be flexible, it can be helpful, just so the workers can have enough time to find a suitable home for the youth. Something that you could do is reach out to foster parents or community members to help find a home for the child. That can sometimes help speed up the process. Every kid is different and will have different needs when you communicate what is happening. So I definitely recommend talking to the team and the therapist about who's going to tell the child and how everything will be presented to them and discussed with the child directly. So if this is something that you are talking to the child with directly, I would recommend having neutral conversation and making sure that we're not placing the blame on the child. So something you could say is, I wanted to let you know that there's going to be some changes in our home coming up. You will be moving to a different foster home in the coming weeks. You can tell the child that you are supporting them through this and that you're going to do everything possible to make sure that the new home is a great fit for them. The child is likely going to follow up with why. Why am I moving? Why can't I just stay here? So I would be prepared with that response. And again, it's really important that we're not blaming the child. So you could say things like, I have some personal responsibilities that I need to tend to. I need to take some time for more training so I can learn to be the best foster parent possible. You can say that you have personal responsibilities coming up, and so you have to make a change in your schedule. You could talk about your personal responsibilities or work interfering with the level of care that you can provide them. And so it's really important that the workers find a better house for them to live in. And of course, please modify these scripts based on the kid and what your real reasons are and like what their needs are in the moment. We're really trying to foster the understanding of the situation, bring them along the way, meet them where they're at versus trying to, create blame or an excuse to the situation. Now, of course, sometimes a feeling is mutual or kids are kind of leading the drive for the change, and that's okay too. We're not going to connect with every child, and there's also just so much going on in their life. It could be for any reason that a child wants to move. And so if that's the case, we can step in and create these opportunities for them to advocate for their needs and their desires and set up times for them to talk to their worker and their advocate or attorney so they can talk about what they really need out of a foster home. When the transition time comes and they've identified a new foster home, we as the primary foster home can really help the kid through this by being open and flexible to visits and conversations during that transition period. So sometimes they may meet the new foster family and have a visit with them. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Anything we can do to support a transition plan can be very helpful and kind of reduce the trauma associated with this change. Another thing you can do as a caregiver is to try to get organized on your end. So getting services organized and set up, making sure you're communicating with all the professionals about what is changing and who the new contacts will be. That can be really helpful. And I wouldn't rely on the caseworker to do that. Of course, they might be doing that, but something that I always do is I keep a list of contacts of who the teacher is, the therapist, the principal, the behaviorist, all of them and their names and phone numbers. And that can be something that you send along with the kids so that the next foster parent has all the information right away. You can also ask the therapist if it makes sense to increase sessions during transition time, or maybe the school counselor can step in to help, just to help the kid as they're making this big move from your house to somewhere else. Any place that you can give control and choice to the child can be helpful. So talking to them about what they want to pack, or what day of the week they want to do the move, or even honestly, what music they want to listen to in the car when you're driving them to the next place. Those small moments, anywhere we can give them choice and control, can be really helpful in this transition. And the last note is, don't forget to update their life book. Make sure you gather all the pictures and that gets sent to the new caregiver. All right, so after the child leaves your home, after a disruption, there are some things that you as a foster parent may want to do. And the first thing is you may want to take a break and kind of just reflect and think about what happened and how you can change or improve or modify things in your home to be supportive to the next kid. So maybe you need additional training, or maybe you need to modify who you are saying yes to in the future. Perhaps you've realized that you're not able to provide maybe therapeutic level care for kids, just maybe because of work constraints or your abilities to support them in those needs. So maybe you're gonna have a conversation with your worker and change the type of kids that you're accepting into your home. It might be helpful for you to attend a support group, vent with your friends, and kind of work through all of those feelings and emotions that you have as a foster parent, because this is also, often a more hectic time in your life too. I hear from a lot of foster parents, they feel immense guilt when this happens. And lastly, when you are ready to foster again, you may want to re-enter more slowly, perhaps by starting with respite, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Lastly, I want to talk through ways that we can support a kid who's coming from a disrupted adoption. So this is a child who was matched for adoption and the adoption fell through and now they are in your foster home. This is a really devastating situation for a a lot of kids, and it's happening more than you might think. I found some research that said that it's between 5 and 20% of adoption placements get discontinued or disrupted. So here are some things that you as a foster parent could do if that child comes into your home. And this was actually provided by community members, so these are things that they are doing in their home that they shared with me, and I wanted to pass along to you. So first is focus on acceptance, their needs, their identity, everything about the child you are accepting, and you can build them up through affirmations. You may also benefit by seeking out attachment-related therapy for the youth, because this is another attachment that has been severed, and we might see kids with attachment-related concerns, so finding a professional who specializes in attachment can be very helpful for kids in this situation. It can be helpful, especially at the beginning, to remind and reiterate the plan. They're going to school and coming back to your house that night, and just foreshadowing and reminding them that they are coming back to you and you are going to be there for them every single day. It's also helpful to create an environment where they are free to share and for us as caregivers to listen. Sometimes we cannot answer all their questions or make things better with just a script that I give you. Sometimes that we just need to sit and listen and sit alongside them as they process what has just happened to them. When you are listening to them, you will hear about their needs. And so it's really important that we're showing up and meeting their needs, even the smallest ones. They may not trust adults, and they may not trust you, and it could take months or years for them to trust adults again. And so when we can show up and meet their needs and listen to their wants and desires every single time, it can help rebuild that trust. One follower even mentioned that it might be helpful to reconnect them with their biological family. You know, kids who've experienced an adoption disruption may feel like they've lost two families now. They've lost their biological family and they've lost their adoption family. So reconnecting to that primary family could be really helpful. And that's beyond just parents. That could be siblings and relatives, cousins, anyone, so they could feel connected to that family. You can also connect them to people that they know and trust. So this could be teachers, coaches, friends, maybe people they knew before they were placed with the adoptive family. Obviously, this takes some legwork. You got to connect to the caseworkers and the youth to try to find these people, but those reconnections can help them. Another follower mentioned that it can be helpful to not get caught up in what success is and what we expect for kids of their age. You know, I talk about this a lot on my channel about meeting kids where they're at. And I think that in this situation, it is very important. They are here with us today, and so we need to value and love on them for who they are today. And of course, please don't forget to support yourself too. It can be very stressful and, consuming when you are supporting a kid who's experienced trauma like this. So going to support group, getting help from friends and family, going to therapy, all of these things can make sure that you are regulated and in the right mind space to support the youth. I'm so curious to hear from you all. Is disruption something you've thought about, considered, been scared about? I'd love to hear your thinking. And if you've been through it, I'd love to hear your experiences too. There is so much nuance in this subject. And so I think the more we can share and learn from each other, the better foster parents we can be.